What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. So I'll be making schedule predictions for every single Power 5 team in college football this upcoming season. I will also do a subsequent conference standings video once I finish up every team in a specific conference, just as like a synopsis of all of my schedule predictions there. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into this one with the Mississippi State Bulldogs schedule predictions. And just some quick thoughts on the Mississippi State program heading into 2022. This is a tough program to nail down for me because they have some very interesting players and some interesting pieces, like Will Rogers at quarterback, for example. And I think Mike Leach is a very good coach, but they just don't have comparable talent to a lot of the other teams in the SEC West in particular, to be, really expected to make any real pushes or serious contenders for the conference or anything like that. And, at the same time, though, they're good enough where they could reasonably win most all of their games, on the schedule in an upset type of fashion. Not that they would be favored in them, but none of them are, for the most part, really out of reach for Mississippi State on a good day. If things kind of, line up and go their way, they have a very real shot at getting a win in most of their games, and that makes them a very hard team to predict because they can kind of be all over the map in the same season, and then they just kind of end up middle of the road, but they have some high highs and some very low lows. Overall, I don't really know what direction the program's headed in long term either because, like I said, they're always a good team, but I don't ever really see them becoming a great team. And so they're always going to kind of hover in that 5 to 9 win range, depending on how the schedule works out for them, how the rest of the conference is doing, and then how they're doing that particular year. And I don't think this year is going to be any different, to be honest. So let's go ahead and get into the schedule, starting with some guaranteed wins for Mississippi State against teams that just have no real hope of beating them, barring some sort of catastrophe next year. And those teams are Bowling Green and ETSU. No point in really giving them any conversation. And so now let's start. First game up is Memphis, and Memphis is a very good Group of 5 team. They're a pretty tough early opponent for Mississippi State, but they are undoubtedly still a better team than Memphis. They should be able to get a win in this one, even though it's not going to be a walk in the park by any means. Mississippi State should be favored here. I think they're going to end up with a pretty solid win to start off their season. Next game up is at Arizona, and that's another interesting matchup to me because it's similar to the Memphis game, where Mississippi State is definitely a better team, but not by a huge margin, so it's going to make for a pretty interesting game, pretty interesting matchup, should be decently competitive, especially this one being on the road at Arizona. But I still have Mississippi State getting a decently easy win in this one. Should be a good game, but they should still be able to win by 2 scores or so. And then now we get into some tougher stuff with at LSU. This is the first time where I feel like Mississippi State is going to be a little bit overmatched, especially being on the road for this one. LSU is a very tough opponent, even in just in year 1 under Brian Kelly. And while I think Mississippi State has a very real shot in this game, and I don't think it's going to be a blowout or anything like that, I do think LSU is a better team. They're at home here, so I'm going to have to go with LSU in this one. Next up is Texas A&M, and A&M is just a much more talented team than Mississippi State at this point. It is what it is. They're not going to overlook them either because they lost to them in upset fashion last year. And like I said, A&M's just a better team than them basically across the board, top to bottom. Most every position group, A&M is going to be better. And while I again think Mississippi State's going to be competitive, they're not going to get blown out really. They have an outside chance in the game, but I think A&M still ends up winning pretty handedly. Next team up is Arkansas, and Arkansas is another team that is just a little bit better than Mississippi State at this point. They're a team that I'm very high on next year, and I think with that talent discrepancy, plus Arkansas is going to have the better quarterback here with KJ Jefferson, in my opinion, I think I'm going to have to go with Arkansas here. They're just a little bit better than Mississippi State. And again, another game that they're going to be competitive in, they could very well win, but if I'm predicting it, I'm going to have to go Arkansas. Next up is at Kentucky, and this game is one of the closest ones on the schedule to me. I think Kentucky is just a little bit better than Mississippi State, but just barely, and Mississippi State got a very big win against Kentucky last year as well. However, this one is on the road at Kentucky, so I'm going to have to give them a slight edge there. I think they have a slightly better quarterback in Will Levis as well. It's a pretty big toss-up game to me, but I'm going to have to side with Kentucky in this one. Next up is at Alabama, and this is just an example of Mississippi State being completely outmatched, and they're on the road. The very slim chance of victory, in my opinion. Alabama is arguably the best team in the country next year. I just don't see Mississippi State standing much of a chance in this one. Next up is Auburn, and Auburn is my pick to be the worst team in the West next year, and while I think roster-wise they're about equal with Mississippi State, I think Will Rogers is clearly the better quarterback in this matchup. I think he's likely going to lead them to a very big home victory in this one. You know, like I said, being in Mississippi State with the better quarterback, I'm not high on Auburn. I think the later on in the season, the worse Auburn's going to get as the program kind of starts to fall apart a little bit. Mississippi State, I think, gets a good win here. And then that brings up home against Georgia, and this is a very interesting game to me, much more so than most other people seem to think of it as. I think Mississippi State has a great chance to get a massive upset in this one, even though Georgia is a far, far better team than them. Across the board, top to bottom, they will be favored, and they should be favored by multiple scores. However, I have Georgia losing this game on the road because of where it is on the schedule for them. It comes after a very tough stretch of conference games for them. It's late in the season, into the November range, and it's before another very big game for Georgia right after this one. Plus, it's on the road. Mississippi State has a history of giving Georgia some troubles under Kirby Smart as well. And so while on paper I think Mississippi State has really little to no shot in this one, I have them pulling off what would be an absolutely massive upset win here, mainly because when I was making the Georgia schedule, I kind of had to pick somewhere they were going to lose. I think this is one where it could happen. It's a very outside shot, but I'm going to pick Mississippi State in this one. And then that just leaves at Ole Miss for the Egg Bowl, and the Egg Bowl is always a very interesting matchup. This year should be no different. The teams are on roughly similar footing. I do think Ole Miss is a better team overall. They're at home in this one as well. We don't know who their quarterback is going to be, but I'm confident in it either way. And so while I think this game is going to be a very close battle, it's going to be a very interesting rivalry game. It always is. I think Ole Miss will come out on top in the end. And so then that would make Mississippi State 6-6 on the season, which probably isn't what the fan base would want, but it seems pretty realistic to me. And without that Georgia upset, it could be 5-7. However, games like Kentucky and LSU and even the Ole Miss game are also winnable, so there's some leeway in the record there. You could have a little bit of a range between 5 wins all the way up to 7, maybe even 8 wins if things go really well for Mississippi State. But I think they'll finish somewhere around 6-6, give or take one game. Last year they finished around 7-5, so technically this is a step back for them from the previous season. But last season they got Vanderbilt out of the East. This year they get Georgia. So to me, there's where you see a lot of your differences there, and I think that's where that other win would be, in my opinion. Anyway, though, that'll do it for this one. Let me know down below in the comment section where you agree and or disagree with me on the Mississippi State schedule in 2022. Tell me what record you think that they'll have and who they're going to lose to, if anybody. Also, if you've made it this far in the video, be sure to go ahead and leave a like because it helps out tremendously. Subscribe to the channel for more college football content in the future. I plan to upload very regularly. And thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.